Hello, everyone. Welcome to another exciting online session by the Lahore Literary Festival. Please welcome Shelly Reddy, who is in Delhi, where she lives and works. Sheela is a seasoned journalist, and she was the books editor at Outlook India magazine. Today, we'll be talking about Sheila's book, Mr and Mrs Jinnah, The Marriage That Shook the World, published by Penguin Random House India in 2017. We're very excited. Welcome, Sheela.
Thank you.
Good to see you. Yes. Can you hear me, Sheela?
Yes. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, I can.
Yeah.
So, Sheela, there's no doubt that, and we've talked about that before, that the very personal Mr. Jinnah has eluded all of us. I think in my lifetime, I didn't really ever know very much about him. And people also say that his personal self eluded his biographers as well. But yours is a wonderful book, and it takes us to places that we haven't been before. It takes us to the period in Mr. Jinnah's life when he was a very successful lawyer, a dynamic politician based in Bombay, a member of the Imperial Legislative Council. And you're looking at the earlier 20th century India, especially Bombay in the teens and the 1920s. This is the story of a Kathiawari businessman's son from Karachi who comes to Bombay via London. Someone who reinvents himself, someone who is entirely self-made, yet handsome, charismatic, and with no frivolity about him. These are the early days of Muhammad Ali Jinnah. My first question to you, Sheela, is what inspired you to write about Mr. Jinnah?
He was a big challenge, Amna, because of the very fact that you referred to, that his personal life was very elusive. And you got the sensation that he deliberately eluded all his biographers. He used to keep a very big distance between himself and his biographers, even in his own time. Many people wanted to write his biography, but he would always keep them at a distance. And
That's
he
right.
left no memoirs or no diaries, or nothing of his was available. So it became a kind of, for me, a sort of treasure hunt to find the man behind the politician. It became like an obsessive hunt for the man behind the thing. So that's why I got fascinated and I started digging around for whatever I could find out.
You were telling me when we'd spoken about this earlier that initially you were planning to write something else, and yet you came upon the letters of Rati Jinnah to Sarojini Naidu in the Delhi archives.
That's right. It was a kind of, say, beginner's luck. I was sort of, I am very fond of the archives, of going into the archives and reading letters. So I was looking for something on Padmaja Naidu's relationship with Nehru, which I knew about, but I had no correspondence to back it. So I was basically trying to find something about that. And when I went into her papers, I was surprised to find that she had left probably the most voluminous personal documents that any one person in recent history had left to a library. It was tons and tons of letters, that she had written to her mother, Sarojini Naidu, and what she had written to her sisters and what her sisters had written back to her and her other siblings, and then to her friends and so on. It's so huge that the library has a whole a book where you have to search for the file that you want, because there are kilos and kilos of files. So in order to locate the right file, for every year of her life, there's a different file. And for every correspondence, there are about 100 or so files, kind of thing. So in that catalog, I saw something which said correspondence with R. Jinnah. And earlier, I had become intrigued by Jinnah's personal life purely as a reader. I was just amazed that a man who was so interesting, who had such an interesting life, how is it that nobody had touched his personal life? And I had started trying to read something about Jinnah's personal biography. And
Can I
didn't
cut
find,
you here, Rati? Can I cut you here, Sheela?
yes,
Wasn't this about the same time that Jaswant Singh book had come out, and
right.
he had talked about Mr. Jinnah in certain places very nicely. So how did
Yes.
that impact your thought process?
Yes, actually, it was Jaswant Singh's book that got me interested in Jinnah because I was the books editor of Outlook then, and it was a business to read, books that were making the news. And also, I was not very interested in Jinnah because Jaswant Singh's book was so important. I had to read it, and when I read it, I was surprised to find that this was not the kind of stereotype politician that I was led to believe by my reading of school textbooks, or the kind of personality that is projected in newspaper, in cinema, in the little cinema where he had been portrayed.
Yes.
So he's usually this cardboard figure of somebody who's, at least in India, is portrayed as this very obstinate, hard politician with no, you can't penetrate through that persona to what he was really all about. But Jaswant Singh's book gave a glimmering of an inner man, which interested me very much, which intrigued me very much. One was his mention of that intercommunal marriage that he had, and the romantic nature of that relationship, because there was a 24-year age gap there. And that got me interested. So, and there was also a very moving chapter written by Jinnah's secretary on Jinnah's last days,
Right.
and that ambulance ride and all that, which was very moving. The kind of account that was portrayed in Jaswant Singh's book, which was basically a transcript of that secretary's account. So I wanted more. I wanted to read more about this. But when I started looking, I couldn't find anything. I found a couple of fiction, and then there was one very unsatisfactory skeletal biography of Rati, but there was really nothing concrete. And so I had to abandon my search because I thought this is not leading anywhere. This is just the stuff that I understood why there was no biography of him, because I thought there's no material available. But when I went into the archives,
were you at any stage wary about writing on this subject, especially after the reaction that Mr. Jaswant Singh's book had got in India?
Oh no, because I'm not a BJP politician, so I have nothing. I have no political view to protect. I'm just a journalist, so it's my business to come to a subject with an impartial mind and look. I was open-minded enough to want to know who this man is.
But your book was published in 2017. What if you had published it now? What kind of reaction would you have got now, suppose, in 2020?
I don't think I would have. I thought anything about the kind of reaction that the book would get from the government. I didn't think of it in relation to which government was in power or anything. I was I was basically, my search was for, I'm always very interested, even in my journalism, in looking at how politics influences personal lives and
Right.
how personal lives in their turn influence politics. And Jinnah for me was emblematic of that. I can think of no other character in recent times who where politics and personal was so closely intertwined. You know, first there was the politics of the time, which had an impact on the marriage, and when that marriage disintegrated, it had an impact on politics.
Politics,
So
that's
for
right.
me,
So let's set the scene, Sheila. Let's set the scene for Mr. Jinnah in the early 20th century. Rati was born in 1900, and Mr. Jinnah was 24 years older than her. And he first met her in 1914 when she was just 14 years old.
right.
So tell us a little more about that, Mr. Jinnah, when he comes to Bombay and becomes that quintessential Bombay man after years of education in England, and he creates a persona, an image which he cultivates over the years. So tell us a little more about that time.
I think going to England was the beginning of a reinvention of the Jinnah as we know him now, because that's where he really became himself. And it was very intriguing when I was reading his various biographies of his years in England, how studiously and diligently he invented himself. You
That's
know,
right.
right from discarding the clothes he had gone in to reading Cicero and getting his views of the thing, going to the British Library, underlining the right passages of what a gentleman consists of. So he was studiously rebuilding himself as an English gentleman, right? And
Yes.
and with the result that he had overthrown everything which his father stood for, including the being. He was sent initially to England to be an apprentice at a trading firm, so that he would come back and help his father with his business. But
Right.
very soon after that, and I suspect that this has something to do with his mother's death, that he broke from that, from whatever role he had been cast into by his father, and he decided to fulfill his mother's dream for him, which was that she just vaguely knew that he was going to be a great man. She didn't know what. So, in a way, London gave him the space to
Find
be.
himself.
Yes, yes. And
Okay.
so when he came to Bombay, uh, it was amazing that he made it so fast to the top, because Bombay at that time was probably crowded with, aspiring barristers, and all of them would have had connection. But here was a penniless man with a whole family dependent on him, because by that time his father's business had crashed and he had become bankrupt, and he had a whole half a dozen siblings to look after who were.
Sorry to cut you, Sheila. Can you hold your mic away from yourself a little bit? Yes. Yeah. Okay, go ahead.
Yeah, so he had all these siblings. He had to. He was responsible for, who were financially dependent on him, and he didn't have a single contact in Bombay. And yet, within a couple of years, he managed miraculously uh, to make a decent living for himself, become a kind of magistrate, and then even have the luxury of refusing a magistrate's job because he felt that he could make more money in private practice, and he made it
Sheela,
to.
sorry to cut you again, but people are saying that your voice is not coming very clearly. So
I was holding the mic closer. Is this better?
I think so, yes.
Huh? Is this better?
Yes. It's a bit
very.
static.
I don't know why. Is this better?
Can you disconnect it and maybe just use your computer mic?
That I don't think that will work. Is this better?
Okay, no, I can't hear you now. You'll need to put it back in again. Please connect it again. Sheela, please connect the mic again.
It's okay, says Iman.
You'll have to either put the volume up or connect your mic again.
Can't hear you. Hear you.
Yes. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Okay, great. So yes, you were telling us about Mr. Jinnah when he was in Bombay.
Yes.
And he
So
didn't know anyone.
yeah, I was saying that it was quite amazing that a man who started from nothing was able to build up a career as one of the top lawyers, top barristers of Bombay, and it was quite miraculous. And he became what he became one of the richest lawyers. And I think at some point, by the time Rati would have known him as a young teenager, he was not only a top lawyer of Bombay, but also a star politician, a nationalist politician.
So when
Very,
people
very,
when people read your book in India and they read about Bombay of that time, were they familiar with what his life was like then, or was it something new for them? Because in Pakistan, I know people really enjoyed that the descriptions of his life, which they hadn't really, which your book, so fascinatingly describes. What was the reaction in India?
the reaction in India was this is something that always amuses me a little because one of the first questions, one of the most popular questions that I get asked on both sides of the border is, what was the reaction in the other country? Because they are assuming that if the book was popular in Pakistan, it should be unpopular in India, or if it is popular in India, it should automatically be unpopular in Pakistan. So it always surprises them when I tell them in India that people in Pakistan like it. And it always surprises audiences in Pakistan when I say that people in Bombay loved it. I had my book launch in the Taj Mahal Hotel in Bombay,
How
where
wonderful.
all the Malabar Hill
Yeah.
crowd was there. Uh,
Right.
and no, but the interesting thing was so many people shook my hand and said, I live next door to Jinnah's house.
Yes.
You know,
Yes.
so they felt a great connect with him because he was basically, even in his own time, a Bombay guy, you know.
Yeah.
He
Yeah.
was called the uncrowned king of Bombay. Bombay loved him. Uh, he was
That's right.
their own kind.
So
Somebody.
let's go back to that social milieu where Rati met Mr. Jinnah and what was going on amongst her friends as well. Especially, we heard the story of Nan uh, and the fact that she marries Syed Hussain. So these intermarriages were taking place at that time in India. Tell us more about that.
Yeah. So there was basically a new kind of India being born at that time, and that was people who had been uh, English educated, so to speak. So in a
That's
way, being English educated gave them a sense of that religion was not so important as being of the same background and sharing the same views and that kind of thing. So
a class
nobody,
thing, basically.
yeah, but nobody talked about intercaste marriages. It was the elephant in the room that nobody would discuss, because there were families who were out of parda and there were families who were in parda. And
Yes.
normally the rest of India would get married conventionally very early on. By the time they're 12, they're either engaged or married. But there
Mm.
would be the more educated people who frequented clubs and who had Western lifestyles,
Mm.
who followed the English style of living.
Yeah.
And they didn't tell, I mean, they didn't distinguish between uh, their friends of different by religion. It was just a class thing. I mean, if you had friends in both religions. So
Hmm.
there was a young uh, crowd that was growing up that believed that it was possible to marry across religious divides.
Hmm.
But it was only when they acted on these beliefs that they realized that their parents were caught in contradictions which hadn't been made plain to them. Huh?
So basically, Pandit Motilal Nehru was able to do something that Mr. Dinshaw Petty could not do.
Yes, yes, absolutely. He was able to not only get the couple divorced, but
Hmm.
also to send her off to Gandhi's ashram for a kind of cultural re-education, so to speak. Huh?
And she accepted all of that.
Well, you see the letters. I've quoted the letters which she wrote.
Yeah.
She she did have a problem. She couldn't adjust to, but at some point, I think she felt uh, it was more practical and pragmatic for her to pick somebody her father had chosen, which interestingly enough was not somebody from her own community, but somebody from another community. I think he came from Maharashtra. uh,
Mm.
and he made it appear as if it was her own choice, because the young man was invited to the house in Allahabad and
Right.
they met, and then the young man asked her if he would marry. So it looked as if she could exercise some choice. But what was not spelled out is there are the lesser choices you can make, but you can't make a choice which involves an interreligious marriage.
But Mr. Jinnah and Rati Dinshaw did that, and despite the fact that after their marriage, Mr. Dinshaw filed an injunction in court. So let's get a little further and go there. Tell us about what happened then when Mr. Jinnah married Rati in 1918.
Yeah. As the book details, it was a very well planned uh, uh, marriage, so to speak, so that it wouldn't look like an elopement.
Mm-hmm.
Jinnah didn't want it to look like an elopement, so he planned it very carefully so that he couldn't be accused of abducting uh, Dinshaw's daughter. Uh,
Right.
and so when they did get married, uh, he made it seem like he announced it in newspapers, and he made it try to look like a normal thing, but he couldn't escape the kind of tremendous uh, reaction there was. It created a huge buzz, not because there hadn't been intercommunal marriages before, but I think because of, of the high profile people who were involved in this,
That's right.
and, and the nature of Sir Petit's uh, uh, opposition to the marriage, I thought was very indiscreet and unwise of him. The path he chose was a litigant's path. Instead of controlling his daughter, he went to court to try and control Jinnah. Huh? And it all backfired on him because it became a huge scandal. The whole of India was talking about it. It was discussed in newspapers all over undivided India, and it created a kind of tension between conservative Muslim community and a conservative Parsi community. Now, the Parsi community had been looking, they were feeling a little insecure at that time. And there had been a series of marriages in which the foreigners were being brought into the temple and were being converted and so on. And so Rati became a kind of whipping boy she became a case. She was so high profile that it was convenient to turn her into what do you call Balika Bakra? Huh?
Yes, in your book, you mentioned that while the sort of religious clergy of the Parsis expressed their dissatisfaction with her actions, they don't really take Mr. Jinnah's name or her name, but they just refer to the marriage.
Yes,
and use them as as an example to the others, that basically trying to say that these highly educated English style young women of the Parsi community were not doing a service to the community at all. So right. Sort of fundamental aspects of the Parsi community came to arise at that point, and Mr. Petty gave into that.
It was a very punishing panchayat decision by the Parsi panchayat. There had never been that kind of reaction to interreligious marriage before, as there was in Rathi's case. It was extremely severe, because they decided that anybody from the family who even visits her or invites her for any of their ceremonies will not be given the privilege of Parsi rights, when you're dying or when you're getting married and so on. So nobody could dare to interact with her. It was like a complete excommunication, very brutal kind of thing.
And that you feel was the reason, and that was the reason for her unhappiness over the years.
In her case, I feel that everything was conspiring against her. It first of all, she picked somebody who was not temperamentally accessible to an emotional life, right? Jinnah, at the best of times, could not have provided her the kind of companionship and soul comrade that she was looking for. He was just not emotionally available. On top of it, they would probably have had a very happy marriage, a satisfactory marriage, if everything hadn't conspired at that time to destroy that marriage. First thing was uh, Rati's complete isolation, which was triggered by the Parsi community deciding that it'll have nothing to do with her. So,
Yes.
because Bombay society at that time was ruled by the Parsis,
Mm.
to be ostracized by the Parsis is to be completely cut off from all society. Huh?
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
then on top of it, there was this. There was she was married into. Uh, she was married at a time when Jinnah was having extraordinary difficulties in his political career.
Yeah.
He had built up a career for so long, almost 20 years. Huh?
Mm.
And he was looking forward to playing a very big part in the Congress. He was one of the stars of the Congress. And then suddenly Gandhi came back to India and
Mm.
completely changed, transformed the politics of that time
Right.
so that he had no place in it. Huh? And the thing is, there were lots of other people who were hypocritical enough to pretend to bend to Gandhi's will without really transforming their minds. They didn't believe in his philosophy, but they went along because Gandhi was such a popular leader. But
Mm-hmm.
being who he was, it was impossible for him to to outwardly submit to something which he didn't believe in inwardly. I feel so that he was completely brutally thrown out of the Congress, and then so in the year that he got married was the year he started having the greatest difficulties. Within 1 year of Rati's marriage, she
Mm.
was the mother of a child. She didn't
Mm.
want to be a mother. Then
Mm.
she was uh, the wife of a of a politician who was struggling desperately to regain a foothold in politics. Huh?
But
And
she was
then,
very much, in your book, you explain that she was very much part of his political life, going with him to meetings and, believing in the same ideals. Um, so how did that impact their marriage?
I don't believe that they were on the same page uh, politically. I mean, Jinnah was a liberal, but I don't think he was a liberal in his head. I
Hmm.
think somewhere inside him, he was very much his father's son. Uh, uh,
Right.
he had some of that background. So, if you remember, the Rati's only real participation in politics as an equal of Jinnah was
Mm.
during the protest against the governor's address uh,
Yes.
against Wellington. And
Mm.
that's the one time when that was the only time when Rati acted out of, was very enthusiastic about taking part in that kind of politics,
Mm.
where they would be part of the street demonstrations and
Mm.
would give orations and that kind of thing. But that very quickly came to a halt, and we
Well,
never know.
the child was born in a year later, so.
She was already pregnant with the child at that time, I think, because that was
Mm.
June and the child was born in August, right? I think
Yeah.
that was May or June, April or May, I can't remember now. But
Mm.
the other thing was that while Jinnah liked her to be present at his side,
Mhm.
he didn't really like, I suspect, he didn't really like her her to be a participant in the
Mhm.
same way that that Gandhi was involving women in. Now, Rati's loyalties are divided here because Jinnah's thrown out of the Congress. She too has to be thrown out of the Congress. Whereas
Mhm.
Gandhi, for the first time, was involving women in politics
Mhm.
in a way that nobody else had.
Right.
Huh? And she, because of her loyalty to Jinnah, was outside of this whole movement where women were, distributing things and they were doing their little bit, taking
Mhm.
part in a people's movement. Huh?
It was only later that Mr. Jinnah involved women, I think, much closer to partition when women also felt part of the Pakistan movement, but maybe not in these early days when he was just finding his feet.
Correct. Uh, when I started this book, I didn't know
Mm.
much about the politics of modern times and almost nothing except what I had studied in school textbooks. I came with a blank mind, and there's
Right.
so much. It is such a divided history, and there's
Hmm.
so much to read, and there's so many different versions that I can't pretend to have penetrated more than till where this marriage ended. So
Right. It's very complex.
yes, so I'm familiar with what happened till she died, and maybe
Sheila,
I did.
let's talk about your sources because those are fascinating. I mean, you use the letters of Naidu, those letters that you found of Rati Jinnah to Sarojini Naidu and to her two daughters, and that was a primary source. What else did you go to? What other sources did you penetrate?
You know, the letters to Padmaja Naidu were not so important because
Hmm.
while there were almost 100 pages of it, uh,
Hmm.
they did not reveal much of who Rati really was. There were lots of references. There was kind of a girlish frivolity about the letters. There were some mentions. They were very breezy
Hmm.
letters girlfriends exchange,
Hmm.
young women exchange between them, where nothing which affects you very deeply is really discussed. Huh?
Hmm.
The, but what was most invaluable for me was the fact that because Rati was so lonely and isolated,
Hmm.
she ended up spending her entire day in a suite of a hotel where Sarojini Naidu lived,
In
and
Bombay,
in Bombay,
at the
because
Taj Hotel itself.
yes, at Sarojini Naidu at this time was separated from a family in Hyderabad and uh, had resettled in Bombay because she had become the president of the Bombay Congress, which was a very important political post at that time. So,
Mhm.
and she was a very close friend of Rati's.
Mhm.
So now, luckily for me, Sarojini Naidu was a confidant of Rati's innermost secret. And
Mhm.
also, she was a prodigious letter writer. She used
Mhm.
to write letters every single day
To her
to
daughters.
her daughters and sometimes to her son, not so regularly, uh,
Mhm.
and to many friends. And
Mhm.
because Rati was a common factor in this circle, there is almost a daily mention of
Mhm.
Rati in her letters back home. So it's thanks to Sarojini Naidu's letters that I have almost a daily account of
Of her
what is going on. of Jinnah's household.
Wow.
So,
Fascinating.
so yeah, so it was well worth looking at that. But
Mm.
Jinnah himself continued to be a cipher, although Jinnah was also a very close friend of Sarojini's.
Mm.
Uh, he was not somebody who would ever talk about his personal life. Even when his marriage broke up, he refused to talk about it to anyone. So it was for to get his point of view was much harder because when you go to his letters, they are too impersonal
And
to read.
probably
And yeah, yeah.
let me ask
So
you a question here, Sheela.
yeah,
So while you're doing all your research and you've written the book, what would you say is that additional or new information you found on Mr. Jinnah as someone who wrote a biographical account of his life? What have you found which was new, which other biographers have not spoken of to date?
I for me, I don't know if other I don't know about other biographers, but for me, the most exciting discovery was
Mm.
the collection, his personal collection of books in in the Karachi University Library,
Wow.
which are stored in a basement there in the Karachi University.
And are
And
they in good condition?
sorry.
Are they in good condition?
Oh, yes, they're very well preserved. Uh,
Mm.
but for me, the most exciting thing was to open these books
Mm.
and to see, to see Jinnah's markings on the pages, to see an occasional note made by him,
Mm.
and to see the kind of books he used to read and the kind of notes he made. It was
Mm.
as exciting as finding a diary.
Mm.
That was the closest I came to feeling the person that he was.
It is.
I
It is.
remember, sorry, I
Go ahead.
remember one noting that excited me tremendously, and this
Mm.
was a biography of Napoleon.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I forget who the author was. It obviously belongs to Jinnah. And there was one paragraph in it which was so deeply underlined and uh,
Mm.
so in so many ways that paragraph had been lifted out of the text because it obviously meant something to the owner of that copy. And this
Mm.
was like, there were three, four underlinings. Then there was at the margins, there were some more lines that were made. And
Mhm.
this paragraph had to do with Josephine's betrayal of Napoleon and Napoleon having taken her back,
Mm.
reasoning to himself that it was his fault that she had strayed because he had not paid any attention to her, and that if he was to take her back, he must not blame her. So it was for me, it was a very exciting discovery. But I would guess that uh, the another revelation was in the memoirs of his friend
Mm-hmm.
to discover how many friends wrote so fondly of him and described a person who was so different from what I imagined he was like. I mean, he was quite different from anything
Yes,
that
because
had.
you're talking of the time before M.A. Jinnah became the Qaid-e-Azam. So that was yet another journey that he was
Yes,
going to take. And it was
yes,
probably after Rati's death in 1928
yes.
that he threw himself into his work. What I also found really interesting was the bit when he asked his sister to leave when he's getting married. And Fatma Jinnah has been living at his home in Bombay for about 10 years.
Yes.
And when he decides to marry Rati, he asks his sister to move to his other sister, Shireen's home.
Yes.
So
So,
that just shows, I mean, an insight into his mind, how he, wanted both ladies to have their own independent lives. And also throughout the book, there's several places where you mention how indulgent he was of Rati and allowed her to do so many things, without batting an eyelid. That if she wanted to buy things and spend money, especially when they were traveling, she traveled with him the first year almost everywhere that he went, and took her retinue of servants and her dog and all the other paraphernalia that she needed.
not just the first year. I think right up to the end, he used to tolerate that whole, the baggage of the cats and everything. He never protested.
And also, despite you saying that there were times when, as a person, he was torn between being, exclusively sort of modern, yet his moderate traditional side also came into play. And but he never said a word when Rati wore exactly that what she wanted to wear. She explored her personality through her clothes as well, and he never commented on that. So any particular incident about that you'd like to comment on?
Yeah, there was this very famous uh, incident, right, where she's gone to the governor house, Governor Wellington,
Mm,
and uh, at that time, I don't think her clothes would have caused a comment in the society she was used to, which
mm,
was the Wellington Club and that kind of place, because
mm.
young people were dressing like that. They were wearing very uh,
Risky.
not risque, basically
Okay.
sleeveless blouses,
Mm,
and whereas their mothers, I mean, even Lady Petite, who was very elegant and fashionable, uh,
mm,
basically what that generation was doing uh, was taking the Victorian blouses with a lot
mm,
of lace and so on, and
mm,
wearing that with a sari, uh, sort of, doing a kind of fusion Indian wear. But
mm,
the younger women who were
mm,
basically not Victorian, they had grown up after the war, right? And everything had changed. And they
mm,
were also, in a way, keeping up with the fashions in England, just as
mm,
the previous generation had been.
mm.
Except that fashion had changed there. And so you were getting more, more revealing clothes.
Right.
You were getting more, a kind of blouse which was sleeveless and tight fitting and so on.
Mm,
So now it would completely pass muster, and it
mm,
probably would have passed muster in any of the social crowd that Rati was used to. But
mm,
where she was going in these meetings
mm,
and to these prosy old parties like the governor's thing where there were mostly old people, she would
mm,
have probably have created a stir because of she was first of all a very beautiful woman, and on
mm,
top of it she was very strikingly dressed in the
mm,
new fashion, and it
mm,
did not catch the governor's wife's approval. So while all the men approved, the women were like, the Britishers' colonial wives were extremely starchy at that time,
right.
big snobs. So
Mm,
apparently, Lady Wellington said, asked her ADC, uh, fetch Rati a coat because she must be cold. At which Jinnah got up instantly from his chair, and he said, when Mrs. Jinnah is cold, she will let you know about it. And he walked out with Rati out of the governor's house, and is said to have never stepped in there again.
And apparently she also made him very modish post-war, and he was used to his very immaculate and proper, graceful tailored suits, but so she made his ties a little looser, and that was also fascinating to read.
Yes, I think that he dressed like the stuffy Victorian fashion, right? Which was those high cravats and so on. That was the style at the time when he was a young man. But in Edwardian England, everything had changed. So since he married Rati, he would mostly shop or sort of get his suit tailored in Paris or London. Yes. And she had very superior taste. So he leaned on her for if you look at the photographs, you'll see that the Jinnah before marriage and after, there's a complete transformation of the man in the hairstyle.
Let's go through some of the photographs that you have, Sheela. I'm just going to share them, and then we can talk about them one by one.
Yeah, this is Padmaja Naidu, who was a great friend of Rati's.
And that's Sarojini Naidu?
Yes, a very famous woman in her time. This is Padmaja's other daughter, who was also adored Rati and thought she was the acme of good taste and everything that was wonderful. This is Sarojini's husband, which was also a love marriage. This is one of the letters that the Padmaja and Rati exchanged. There are some 100 letters, like 100 pages of letters like this. This is with the younger daughter.
So much fun fascinating to have to go through all of these letters.
Yes, you'll see the crest in the letter before is of Petit Hall, but after Rati married Jinnah, she designed her own letter paper.
Right here.
Yeah, so she made it into an RJ kind of thing. So she had her own embossed letterhead. This is Rati as a very little girl.
Yes, this
is Petit Hall, which was almost like a palace, and these are the children who are dressed exactly like the Parsis of the higher class, of the elite class at that time, were very into studio photographs.
Right.
So this is Sardine Chapeti, who just go back to Sardine Chapeti. You'll see his cravat is the kind of Victorian thing, very stiff collar and that kind of thing. He's wearing the Parsi hat, but he's wearing the British clothes. And this is Lady Petty, one of the high society women of the thing. Again, her posed at a studio with her pearls and her. You'll see her blouse is very Victorian in that sense. They used to take the best lace and so on, and then cut, make blouses out of it. And this is Rati's aunt, who is very interesting because she was a financially independent woman, well-traveled, very much her own person, went to a finishing school. And she's interesting because Rati could have had a life like that if she had stayed within the Parsi society. If she hadn't opted to marry Jinnah, she would have been an independently wealthy woman in her own right.
Mm.
This is not Rati's uncle. There was some mistake in this
Rati's
thing.
mother's uncle.
Huh?
Is that Rati's
No, this is Rati's grandfather.
grandfather? Okay.
Nana, you say?
Yes, because Rati's mother herself was an heiress.
Yes. This is the uncle who was in charge of the panchayat when it decided that Rati will be, excommunicated. Not literally excommunicated, but amounting to the same thing. I think this is the gate of the cemetery where she is buried.
Right.
This is her thing, which I heard at that time that the gravestone itself is very elaborate,
Mm.
and it's very specially made there. This is Jinnah's father.
So
this is the school that Jinnah went to as a young boy before he went to England.
Mm-hmm.
This is him after he came back. Now look at him. This is when he returned from London, and he never wore traditional clothes. And I suspect this. I think this photograph is dedicated to his father. He took it for his father's sake. I have a feeling, I'm not sure, it's just a hunch I have, that Jinnah's father wanted a picture of him because he was matchmaking for him. Because his wife was already dead, and he was a very eligible bachelor at that time. But Jinnah refused to get married when he came back. He was very content to be a bachelor. He was considered by his contemporaries to be a very gay bachelor. He had a wonderful time. This is Fatima, who was, in a sense, Jinnah's ward for a long time, because there's, I think, 12 years, 15 years, or 13 years, I can't remember, age gap between them. So she was a very little baby when he went to London. And when he came back, she was still a very small girl. And then when his father died, she was in his care, and he did something very bold that nobody in his community apparently had done before him, which is that he decided that his sister would get a convent education because he knew the value of getting a British, a kind of English education. So he put her in a convent school in Bandra, which was at that time quite far. It was about a few hours ride from Bombay. He had to go by horseback to get there. And the whole community was up in arms against Jinnah putting this little girl in a convent school because they understood that this would isolate her from the community in a way, because she would become, in a sense, unmarriageable. Uh,
Mm-hmm.
and then she would lose touch with her family, and she would be basically overeducated,
Right.
uh, to lose her place in the community. So people didn't want him to send, but he took a very bold decision and put her there. And so when she passed the matriculation,
Mm.
he uh, he was by then living alone. He had got the older of his siblings married, and he would keep her with him. She would live with him. They were very companionable siblings.
Mm-hmm.
And in the daytime, while he was working, she would go spend the day with her sister. And in the evening, he'd pick her up, and they'd live together in the same apartment. And they were very close to each other. And
Mm.
in a way, she was very happy in the role that she had been cast in, which
Mm.
was, very special to a very special brother. Huh? And
Right.
so uh, his sudden decision to marry at 42, when he was already a confirmed
Bachelor.
bachelor, uh,
Mm.
must have been a big shock to her.
So, what do
Now,
you think attracted? What do you think attracted Rati to Muhammad Ali Jinnah?
if you read the accounts of young people, both mostly male accounts like Chaglas, huh?
Mm.
He was a very, very attractive person. Huh?
Mm.
First of all, he was hugely handsome, and he dressed very well. When he used to talk in court, all
Mm.
the younger lawyers and students would go crowd the courtroom where he was appearing, because he was such a star. He was
Mm.
called Beau Monde in the legal magazines. He was
Mm.
looked up to as a epitome of style, and of handsomeness and that kind of thing. Then
Mm.
he was also uh, a very ardent nationalist. Huh?
Right.
And this attracted all the young people, because there was a growing nationalism in the cities, and he
Mm.
was somebody they could all look up to. And Jinnah was very good with young people. He would
Mm.
hold a Saturday. He would, abandon all his work, and he wouldn't allow anyone to disturb him while he
Mm.
ran a kind of Saturday uh, club sort of thing for younger people who would
Mm.
flock to his chambers, so that they could have a chat with him, and they could be mentored by him. He would lend them books and that kind of thing.
Mm.
Now I feel that Rati must have grown up. There's one story that he was there when she was born.
Mm.
Definitely, he knew her father and aunt, that is father and aunt, uh,
Mm.
from 1900, from the time uh, uh, when Rati was born, because Sir Dinshaw Pettit was an extremely uh, enthusiastic litigant. So he was a lawyer's dream come true. So
Mm.
Jinnah did a lot of work with him. Now, but the romance actually started when Jinnah was invited to spend summer with them at their summer retreat. And when he was there, uh, the Petit family was very into dramas, and they were very social,
Mm.
and Jinnah was very comfortable in the Parsi social context. All his
Mm.
friends were Parsis. He didn't have any friends in his own community. They were mostly Parsi
Mm.
friends. uh, and uh, he he was, he was more like the Parsis than he was a Muslim. Huh?
Mm.
And so he fitted right into the Petit family. He was a great writer. Uh, he loved dramatics. As you know, when he was in London as a student, he almost got into theater because he was offered a job in a Shakespearean company. And
Mm.
it was because of his father's disapproval that he had to drop the job after he took it. But he was very enthusiastic about working in a theater company.
Mm.
And he was well read. So he would have been a fascinating companion for Rati, who didn't have many friends her own age.
So what did
All
what did he find fascinating about a 14-year-old girl?
I feel that we have nothing to show for it except her poems, which hint at there having been some attraction between them. But
Mm.
uh, judging by the memoirs of other young men of that time, I suspect that Jinnah was really only comfortable with very young people. He was not, he was very stiff with women otherwise.
Mm.
Not many of them he was close to. He was definitely, we don't know of any close relationship he had with any woman. Uh, he, it was always, and he was at his best when he was with people who were much younger than him. They brought
Mm.
out the best in him. And uh, Rati, Rati's adoration of him would have been a powerful attraction. Then she was also an extremely uh, beautiful woman and very, very sought after. There were
Mm.
so many princes and so many people playing court to her. So to be sought after by such a woman would undoubtedly be very flattering to Jinnah. And the other thing was that she herself was a very mature mind. Huh? And
Yeah.
she loved discussing politics. She was a very ardent nationalist herself, and uh, she and Jinnah at that time was, or even later, I think, the his only passion in life was politics. He had no interest at all in any other subject.
Mm.
So they would be well suited to each other because she would have been a very close listener to what he had to say about politics. And I feel the other thing that would have attracted her to him was that he was so so equal in a sense. He didn't patronize her, but
Mm.
treated her as an equal. That would have been very attractive to somebody like Rati.
So one of the questions we've got from our audience, Sheela, is: are there any pictures of the couple together? Because we've seen pictures of them apart, but are
Yes,
there any
yes.
photographs of them together?
This has been the whole mystery for me. I have never been able to figure it. I've searched and searched and searched, but there is absolutely no photographs of them together. Uh,
Mm.
uh, and I don't know why that should be so, because both of them were photographed quite often, and
Yeah.
it could be that not many of her photographs are extant. Only a few have survived. And
Mm.
it could be that uh, they just didn't survive. They were all lost or something. But nothing remains. There's just no picture.
And this is all that you found in the archives in Pakistan and India.
Yes, absolutely. There's nothing in India. This was all from Pakistan.
Right. So let's fast forward to a few years later when Rati Jinnah decides to leave her husband. And you have an interesting passage earmarked, Sheela, which you could build up to that and then read it out to us because it's really poignant and it would be fascinating to hear.
Right. So uh, this is I think their marriage after the first couple of years uh, is marked by Rati's uh, desire to break it and being unable to break it because there is it, the the marriage is such a mixture of love and distance that they are somehow unable to break free of each other throughout the marriage.
Hmm.
And this when she made the last attempt and she has managed to break away for the third time and she was very sick. Then she becomes very sick in Paris, where she went to live after breaking away from Jinnah
Hmm.
and her daughter. And when she was in Paris, she was almost dying. And when Jinnah gets to hear of it, he left everything else and
Hmm.
went and got her admitted to the right hospital and
Hmm.
stayed there and nursed her back to health. So his friends assumed that the
Hmm.
marriage was once again on. Huh?
Right. Right.
So they were very surprised when uh, this friend goes to visit him after having left seen them together, and
Hmm.
there's no Rati. So this passage is when he comes, Chamanlal comes back and finds that Rati is missing. Uh, Wondering what had happened and yet not daring to ask, Chamanlal finally plucked up the courage after spending the whole day with him to ask Jinnah, "Where is Rati?" Jinnah's answer was curt, "We quarreled. She has gone back to Bombay." And as Chamanlal writes, Jinnah said it with such finality that I dared not ask any more. But in fact, they had not quarreled. It had been the tenderest of farewells, at least on Rati's part, as she tried to explain in a letter she wrote to him as soon as she boarded a ship to Bombay. Had I loved you just a little less, I might have remained with you. And far from responding in the heat of the moment, Rati had actually taken time to think over what she would say to him, something that was alien to her spontaneous temperament, trusting as she did wholly to what her instinct produced in words. But now, for the first time in her life, she had torn up the letter she had previously written to him in Paris, writing him a fresh letter after boarding a ship in Marseille. "I had written to you in Paris with the intention of posting the letter here, that is, in Marseille on board the SS Rajputana, as she says in the postscript. But I felt that I would rather write to you afresh from the fullness of my heart." It was a letter almost frightening in its absence of all hope and future, drained of all life and passion, and yet filled with great tenderness and sorrow, as if her only concern now was how best to protect his overtuned feelings from the hurt she was about to deliver by deliberately putting an end to their tragedy. "Darling," it begins, her bold, clear hand, unchanged by the recent weeks of her illness, her words flowing without faltering. Only one word in the entire letter scratched out and replayed. "Thank you for all you have done. If ever in my bearing your overtuned senses found any irritability or unkindness, be assured that in my heart there was only place, only for a great tenderness and a greater pain. A pain, my love, without hurt. When one has been as near to the reality of life, which after all is death, as I have been, dearest, one only remembers the beautiful and tender moments, and all the rest becomes a half-veiled mist of reality. Even her reproach seems that of a dying woman, all the more terrible because it was drained of all anger or resentment. Try and remember me, beloved, as the flower you pluck and not the flower you tread upon. I have suffered much, sweetheart, because I have loved much. The measure of my agony has been in accord to the measure of my love. She ends with what she could have never said to his face, a heart wrenching plea not to drag her down anymore. Darling, I love you. I love you. And had I loved you just a little less, I might have remained with you. Only after one has created a very beautiful blossom, one does not drag it through the mire. The higher you set your ideals, the lower it falls. I have loved you, my darling, as it is given to few men to be loved. I only beseech you that our tragedy, which commenced with love, should end with it. Darling, good night and goodbye, Rati.
Extremely dramatic. And as someone said while talking to you, I think it was Mr. F.S. Ajazuddin, that this story is the 20th century replay of Romeo and Juliet. And after Rati dies, our all too mature Romeo survives to establish Pakistan. Really quite tragic. So, do you think Mr. Jinnah was as romantic as Rati? Because he buried it deep in his heart and never expressed anything about it for the rest of his life.
Yes, uh, uh, I think he was an extremely emotional man, just as this letter says. He was extremely overtuned senses and feelings she's talking about, and she should know. And he was if he was not such a emotional man, he would not have done something as suicidal to his political career as marry uh, out of his community,
Mm-hmm.
which risking his whole political future. You know, it was something definitely. And you have evidence in their mutual friend Kanji Dwarkadas's memoirs, where he talks about uh, how apparently uh, stiff uh, Jinnah was and kept up a brave face uh,
Mm-hmm.
at the funeral. Uh, and even though they had already been separated for a year then, but somehow even till the end, even while they were uh, together, while they were separated, Jinnah never lost hope of somehow persuading her to come back home again. And one clue about this is Fatima had no clue that
Mm-hmm.
the two were separated. Nobody had a clue except some very close friends that they had been separated. Uh, it was only after she died that Fatima was re-invited into Jinnah's life. Uh, so I was saying at the funeral, he kept up a bold face, you know, and he pretended that he was not affected, and he was talking about politics even as ceremony of the burial was going on. And suddenly, when it was his turn to put the first clod of earth on her, it must have hit him at that point. And then that was the first time that uh, he was seen to have wept in public. You know, the tears just, people were shocked to see how devastated he was. And then Kanji was invited the next day to his home, where he described, even somebody who knew him as intimately as Kanji was shocked at how deeply uh, Rati's death had affected Jinnah. He was, you know, I think the words he uses was he was screaming in agony. You know, he was so devastated.
Sheela, so our time is up. Almost we are over an hour. And, you know, we haven't even touched the story of, or the topic of Dina. And that itself is another discussion. And I hope that we get a chance to do that soon. And I would advise everyone to read the book to get the whole story. Thank you so much for making it all so real for us and writing in such a readable and gentle and soft style that, and the flow is fabulous. Really enjoyed reading your book. Anything in the end you'd like to tell our listeners and viewers?
I can't think of anything except that I find them both so so tragic and so so vulnerable, you know, both of them, and
so it's the story of Mr. Jinnah and Rati Jinnah, but it's the story of everybody. It's the human story, and
yes.
what touches our heartstrings and makes the book so exciting and interesting for us as well. Thank you so much, Sheela, and thanks for your time, and thank you LLF for having us both on board. And so, wishing you goodbye. Have a lovely evening.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye. Bye. Bye.